Hari Vilasa Prabhu is joining us from New York, and he will be speaking about a text from the Bhagavad-gita, chapter 4. He's already with us. I can see him, and we will soon be able to hear him when he switches on his microphone.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Nice to be here. So, thank you again for inviting me. It's always nice. I remember last time it was a very nice session and a wonderful crew of devotees who are interested in hearing, which is really the requirement for being enthusiastic about Krishna consciousness, that somehow other people's enthusiasm is what makes it possible for us to stay enthusiastic. So I appreciate the enthusiasm of Berlin. So we're taking a look today at the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, which is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. And we're taking a look at text number 16. So before we begin, we just chant some invocation prayers for obtain the mercy of the disciplic succession. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jñānatīmirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Saguna Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Dedam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Ladita Shri Vishakhan Vitangscha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I will chant the Sanskrit, and I guess all of you have your books with you, and if you don't, please hear attentively. Kim karma, kim akarmeti, kavayo atra mohitāḥ. Tatte karma pravakṣyāmi, jñātvā mokṣyase śubhāt. Translation. Even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Now I should explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. Purport. Action in Krishna consciousness has to be executed in accord with the examples of previous bona fide devotees. This is recommended in the 15th verse. Why such action should not be independent will be explained in the text to follow. To act in Krishna consciousness, one has to follow the leadership of authorized persons who are in the line of disciplic succession, as explained in the beginning of this chapter. The system of Krishna consciousness was first narrated to the sun god. The sun god explained it to his son Manu. Manu explained it to his son Ikshvaku. And the system is current on this earth from that very remote time. Therefore, one has to follow in the footsteps of previous authorities in the line of disciplic succession. Otherwise, even the most intelligent men will be bewildered regarding the standard actions of Krishna consciousness. For this reason, the Lord decided to instruct Arjuna in Krishna consciousness directly. Because of the direct instruction of the Lord to Arjuna, anyone who follows in the footsteps of Arjuna is certainly not bewildered. It is said that one cannot ascertain the ways of religion simply by imperfect experimental knowledge. Actually, the principles of religion can only be laid down by the Lord himself. Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. No one can manufacture a religious principle by imperfect speculation. One must follow in the footsteps of great authorities like Brahma, Shiva, Narada, Manu, the Kumaras, Kapila, Prahlad, Bhishma, Shukadev Goswami, Yamaraj, Janaka, and Bali Maharaj. By mental speculation, one cannot ascertain what is religion or self-realization. Therefore, out of causeless mercy to his devotees, the Lord explains directly to Arjuna what action is and what inaction is. Only action performed in Krishna consciousness can deliver a person from the entanglement of material existence. So this 4th chapter is entitled Transcendental Knowledge, and an important part of transcendental knowledge, and basically, we could say even the bulk the bulk of the Bhagavad-gita, is in understanding action, the science of action. For us in the modern world, we are a little bit handicapped, one could say, because most of us grow up with the modern idea that action is sort of very free. You know? We're not so much tuned in with this reality that every single thing that we do has a certain reaction. We understand certain things, like there's the law. So we know that if I kill someone or if I steal something, okay, then something will happen. So we know that there are certain things that if I do these things, then there will be some reaction that will hit me. But transcendental knowledge means you understand that every single thing you do will have some kind of a consequence for you. There's no such thing as an action that does not have any kind of consequence. There's no such thing. A large portion of people in the modern world, it's very interesting that due to a secular society and our modern ideology that is basically very godless, people have created a philosophy of thinking that I can do whatever I want to. There's no reaction. There's no God or no divine authority. So as long as what I'm doing is not illegal, then, you know, it doesn't matter. I can sit on my computer and I can do whatever I want to watch all kinds of things, or I can eat whatever I want and whatever, and nothing will happen. There's no reaction. And what's interesting is that the motivation behind this philosophy is that people wanted freedom. People were seeing that religion, usually because all religions have some kind of prescribed way of behavior. And the desire was that we wanted to be free from all these regulations and restrictions. And therefore we thought that if we just throw away religion and then people can be free. Was it Jean-Jacques Rousseau who said, everywhere man is free, but everywhere he is born into chains. So the chains of oppressive society. And it's quite exciting. I mean, I have to say, I myself, I was into it when I was younger. Huh? When I was maybe 15 years old, I had this realization. I was in a certain point, we were in Sunday school. And, you know, I grew up in a Protestant country, so you were always dragged to church. And it was horrible. And until the point I could go, I started smoking some dope, and then at least you can go high to church. Then it made it a little more exciting. So then we were once sitting in Sunday school, and my one friend, one of my friends had an existential breakdown because he was sitting in Sunday school and he was starting to freak out a little. And then he looked and we could see this guy is a little upset. And then my other friend asked him, he says, what's happening? What's wrong? And then he said, dude, look around you. No one believes in this. You know? We're all sitting here in Sunday school, being taught all this stuff, and no one believes it. No one thinks it's true. Oh no, my friend said, my one is freaking out. He said, I don't believe this. He says, I don't believe in this. I'm sitting here, but I don't believe in any of this stuff. And then my other friend looked at him and then he said, no one does. No one here does believe in this. So somehow we all make this break from organized religion, and then we feel some sense of freedom. And we feel, wow, finally I've thrown off this yoke of some kind of idea that something controls my behavior. And now I can be free and I can do whatever I want. But the irony is that this philosophy is the most unliberating thing that exists. It is the greatest source of entanglement because the reality is that whatever you do is meaningful. It does have a consequence. But if you live with the philosophy of thinking that whatever you do has no consequence, then you're completely in so much trouble. It is just, one cannot start to explain how dangerous it is to live life in this way. Firstly, the danger is that you will then do things and you will get all kinds of reactions and you will be blind to the consequence. You will be blind to the fact that where it is coming from. And you see people, they are getting beaten around the ears by life so hard, repeatedly. But they have no understanding that life is actually responding to what they are doing. They have no understanding that the world is intelligently arranging certain things for you to experience in accordance with what you are doing, and with what you are thinking and with how you are treating other people. But people are unable to draw the connection, and therefore all their suffering is seen to be blind suffering, just purposeless suffering that just randomly comes into your life. But that is horrible. Suffering is not such a bad thing, ironically enough. The problem is blind suffering becomes very depressing. If your suffering has no consequence or no purpose or no reason, if it just somehow comes your way, then it becomes very disheartening. But they did an interesting study with on people, a big questionnaire, I think it was in America somewhere, and they asked people, what are some of the worst periods of life that they went through? Some of the worst time in their life, to think about that time. And then I asked them to reflect, would you be willing to have to let go of that period of your life, to not have that period happen, but to also not get what you have learned from that period, the things that you have learned after you moved through that period? And then the overwhelming majority of people, I think more than 80%, when they really thought about it, they said, no, if I think about the most difficult periods of my life that I've passed through, obviously, you can't ask this question to someone who's in it, then it becomes very difficult. But who have passed through it, then if you reflect, you'll see you have learned so much in those times. So much experience and growth has come from that. So this is all part of transcendental knowledge, understanding that what happens to us has a purpose. It's meant to elevate us. So therefore, Krishna says, that's the first part of this fourth chapter, is to understand that whatever we do has a consequence. And what is very nice for those individuals who are able to embrace this, something else happens. And that is that you also understand that everything you do is meaningful. This is the two problems with not embracing the law of karma, is that firstly, you do things and you don't understand you get a consequence. And secondly, you start looking at your life and everything seems completely meaningless. Everything just seems completely useless because you don't understand that everything you do is actually meaningful. The moment that you embrace the reality of karma and you understand that everything you do has a consequence, then even the smallest acts in your life, what you're eating for breakfast, even that becomes meaningful because it will have an influence on your consciousness, and it will have an influence on your life, and it will have an influence on your future. So even the tiniest decisions that we make, these things are important, and they have to be made with a certain sense of intelligence. And this is all part of this, understanding the science of action. So Krishna here explains that even the intelligent people are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. Because it is not so easy to understand also what the consequences are of what you are doing. So a few problems that we have with the law of action. The first thing is then to understand that everything you do has a certain consequence. And the Bhagavad-gita at least explains that those consequences, you understand them according to the modes of material nature. So every action you have will be in either one of the three modes of nature. And then one of those three modes of nature will have an effect. So either your actions will be enlightening, if it's in the mode of goodness, which means they will increase your knowledge, increase your longevity, increase your peace, increase your understanding, so expand your consciousness. Or they will be passionate, meaning they will increase your desire, increase your longing, increase your addiction, increase your predilection towards hard work, increase the thirst or the craving for certain sensual experiences. This is all symptoms of passion. Or they will be in ignorance, meaning they will darken your consciousness. They will cause depression, violence, anger, frustration, and ultimately laziness and inertia, and becoming ultimately helpless. So these are your three options. And this is the only three that there are on the material platform. That's it. Anything you do, it will have one of these three effects. It cannot have no effect. The only actions that have no effect, and that is what Krishna will work towards, is the performance of spiritual activity, real akarma. Now, firstly, the thing to understand is that no action, not doing anything physical, doesn't relieve you from the results. And that's the problem. I remember I have so many people who sometimes they have this philosophy. They say, oh, if life becomes horrible, then I'll just kill myself. And in that way, they think they can be free. Like Albert Camus, the famous existentialist philosopher. He said that, that is the only question, the only important philosophical question is, will I kill myself? And then if you, that's how you obtain power in this world. That's why you understand you're actually in control, because at any time you can end it. But the reality is you can't, because even then you'll get the reaction for that and life will go on. So Krishna explains in the 5th chapter that not doing anything doesn't solve the problem. Now, we do the same thing oftentimes in many of our life. We try to avoid issues. So many issues we have in our life, so many things that are there, and we think we will solve it by avoiding it, by just not doing anything to it. The problem is that then it becomes worse. That's the interesting thing with the law of karma. If you leave it, it becomes worse. You cannot leave it. So not acting or not doing anything will not relieve you from reaction. It will not relieve you from entanglement. Even if you not do anything for that, you can get a reaction. We see, even according to law, if you, for example, see an accident, say someone gets hit by a car, and you're a witness, and you don't do anything, if you don't call the police or call the ambulance or do anything, then you become implicated. You actually can, even up to a certain point, you can probably even get, if the person dies, you can probably get charged for manslaughter. Maybe not direct murder, but at least manslaughter you will get, because you didn't do anything. So interesting, how you're not doing anything, but you get a reaction for it. So therefore Krishna says, this is very difficult to understand the science of action and inaction. And then Prabhupada oftentimes uses the example, then you get a soldier who goes to war and he kills 1,000 people. 1,000 people he shoots personally, and he aims and he tries to do it and he shoots them. And then he comes back and nothing happens. Nothing. Doesn't go to prison, no reaction for it. Yeah? And in fact, he gets a medal for it. So fascinating how even something as intense as death, as murder, even there, the context determines if you get a reaction or not. So fascinating. This is the science of action. It is not so simple. We think that the law of karma, the basic premise is very simple. What you do, you get a reaction. But once one gets into the intricacies of karma, we see it is not so easy to understand exactly how it all fits together, and the specific, to choose the right course of action within this world. It is a little tricky. So therefore, Prabhupada explains that the devotee, how do we make sense of this? How then to choose the right course of action in a world that is very, very complicated? And the reason is that one has to follow, or the principle is that one has to follow the leadership of authorized persons. That is then the way in which one really will get an idea of how to move forward in life and make the right decisions. If you would read the Bhagavatam, for example, you will see that the Bhagavatam is full of devotees who get into trouble. That's basically what the Bhagavatam is. It's just a whole collection of stories of people who are devoted to God, people who have some devotion to God, and all kinds of different devotees. Not just like fully pure, perfect devotees. All kinds of people. Ajamil was a sinful person. He was a sinful person, but somehow he had some devotion for Krishna from his birth. Or we have Chitraketu, who was a very attached king. He was just a king who wanted a son, but also he was also a devotee. We have Kardama Muni. So he was a devotee, a great sage, but he wanted to get married. And that was when he saw God, that's what he asked. And Krishna appeared before him. Krishna says, what do you want? I can give you everything. And then he says, God, I really need a nice wife. What can I say? I just really want to get married. So we see all kinds of devotees on all kinds of different levels, with all kinds of desires. And we see that how they deal with it. So the Bhagavatam is not just a collection of stories. And this is also a way in which we can get out of the cycle of birth and death, is by becoming deeply absorbed in these stories. Because by looking at these stories, they give us the clues. They give us clues for making our own decisions in life. You see, today is the appearance day also. What was it? Today is also celebrating, I can't remember in the Vaishnava calendar, something to do with Bali Maharaj Daitya Puja, I believe. So we see Bali Maharaj also, a very interesting person. He was a demon, born in a demon family, but somehow he got some faith due to his connection with Prahlad Maharaj. But then at a certain point in his life, he was faced with this choice. between doing God's will, surrendering to God, or surrendering to his spiritual master, a demoniac spiritual master, who was just interested in having him obtain more and more power and money. So he had to choose between these two things. And all of us, we will also have that choice. We also face that choice. We will also come at a certain point where you have to choose between what is good for your spiritual life on the one hand, and on the other hand, an option that might take you to give you more money and power. And then if you have become deeply absorbed in the pastime of Bali Maharaj, if you have deeply read that Bhagavatam canto and you have read Prabhupada's purports, then it will help you to make the right decision. So these things should not be underestimated, the importance of hearing these pastimes. And that is the great power of them. So this is all part of what Prabhupada says here, as to act in Krishna consciousness, one has to follow the leadership of authorized persons who are in the line of the disciplic succession. And it is this then that allows us to really see the path forward in life. But at the same time, before you can even start doing that, you have to start taking responsibility for your own life. And that is the big step that has to happen. So all of us here, we are reading Bhagavad-gita, we're trying to do all these things. But really, it only becomes successful, and it only becomes relevant if you are willing to take responsibility for your own life. So most people are actually not taking responsibility for their own life. They are waiting for something, waiting for someone, waiting for some kind of thing that will happen, something that will come and sort of make everything okay. But that kind of waiting is very foolish, because you can wait a very, very long time. Actually, you can wait millions of births. You can sit and wait. But you have to, at a certain point, take responsibility for your life and understand that you will get the result according to your own exertion, also your own effort. And even in Krishna consciousness, it also works like that. You have to do something in order to be able to move up and move forward in Krishna consciousness. And that connection, if you think about the whole Damodar Leela, that's exactly what is being illustrated there, is that there's the two fingers too short. The one is Krishna's mercy, and the other one is the exertion of the devotee. And that exertion can only happen when the devotee takes responsibility for the fact that Krishna will reciprocate according to what I give. You see? So in Krishna consciousness also, we can come to this point where the modern world, I have to just now be honest, that if we look at most of the social movements that are existing today, I'm living here in New York City, which is it is the loca of social movements. So many, it starts here and it spreads here, and they do their protests, around here. Even standing on the roof this year, I've seen so many protests. It's quite amazing. They go past Flatbush Avenue, and then you see everybody with their signs and different kinds of people. So all these different social movements are there. And it is in one sense good, because people are trying to be active citizens, and they are trying to, they see that the world is not fair, that there are bad things happening. They're trying to address those issues. So that is good. That mentality should not be discouraged. But at the same time, one sees within a lot of these social movements a certain kind of victim mentality that is there. This idea that people are not understanding that you also are responsible for what has happened to you and what is happening within this world. It's not just being done to you, but it is in one sense also the first step into changing the world is to take that responsibility. So karma, sometimes people think that if you say something happens by karma, they think that then it becomes very condemning, or they think that then everything is just determined. Oh, what is happening in my life is simply by karma, so what can I do about it? But it's not like that at all. If you understand that everything that is happening to your life is according to karma, it means that then you have the ability to change it, because it's your karma. You did it, you created it. It means then you can also change it. So karma is both. At the same time, it allows us to understand what is happening to us, and it also allows us to see how we can change our future by changing ourselves. And that is the main basis of spiritual life. Social movements must be there. We have to have lawyers and activists and people working in the external field. Just like in our society, we have people that are going out doing so many things within this world to spread spiritual knowledge. But the start of it, it happens internally. It happens in one's spiritual practice, where one makes this orientation shift, this mindset shift of understanding that, yes, I'm responsible for what is happening in my own life. And now I have certain choices that are within my power that I can make. I cannot radically change my life overnight. That is very difficult. I cannot just radically, go 180 degrees in a different direction. But something is there. Some power I have that has been given to me by Krishna. Some power to choose what exactly it is I want to do. And by starting even with very small things, one can build up and actually have a massive influence in one's life. If you read so many books on personal development and self-help psychology and all this stuff, it's so much is out there. But the basic idea is actually very, very simple. Basic idea is that you have to start being able to make your promises. Make promises firstly to yourself, actually, and then later also to Krishna. So it is that basic ability to make a decision, to make some kind of a vow or a promise towards yourself, that today I will do something good for myself and good for Krishna, good for the world. And that ability to keep to that promise, that is the basis, the basic, one can call it a pivot from which one can then actually radically change a lot in one's life. And that is what this fourth chapter is all about, is and then understanding the dynamics of action and inaction, and to see how, as Krishna says here, jñātvā mokṣyase śubhāt. By understanding this, after knowing this, then one will be mokṣyase, liberated from all ill fortune, as Prabhupada says here, misfortune. So all that unnecessary suffering, all that unnecessary misfortune that we pile onto ourselves due to doing so many stupid things. So one can be liberated from all that unnecessary suffering by simply understanding, by taking responsibility and then investing in those things that will lift us up. And it doesn't have to be very difficult. One just has to choose the right goals. In spiritual life also, sometimes, especially in our movement, we have very, very lofty goals. Our goal is to become pure devotees, perfect human beings. So Purushottamas, very high goal. So these goals are very important. But then you also have to have some short-term goals and some mid-term goals to really fix your mind on. And these things help. Like, for example, I once knew a devotee. He came and we were doing outreach at a university, and he was he dropped out of college, and it was like classic, didn't know what to do, where to go, and he sort of ended up with us. And then he took the Krishna consciousness very seriously, very quickly. He started to chant his 16 rounds and give up all his bad habits, and he was going quite well. And then he went home for the holidays, and then when he came back, he was completely devastated, in tears, because he just went straight back to where he came from and partied very hard and did all kinds of wild things, and he thought that this is the end of my spiritual life. But then he came in and he was in such a distraught state, and then we said, yo bro, these things happen, nothing has changed. Life is still Krishna's eternal servant, karma is still there, and happiness can still only be found in spiritual life. So might as well just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and just get back to the program. So then he sort of was very encouraged that he got a second chance. So he again started to practice spiritual life. And then again, the end of the year came and he had to go home. He had to go home to his parents who were living in the other city. And then we sat down with him. We said, now, what is your plan going to be? Like, what happened last time. So what's your plan? What are you going to do? How are you going to stay out of trouble? What's your plan of action? You have to go in with a plan. So then we said realistically, are you not going to party? He's like, I can't really make that promise because it's just last time I thought I wouldn't, and then I saw what happened. So then we came to an interesting solution, an interesting goal that he had. And the goal was, when he will go home, whatever he does, before he does anything that he shouldn't be doing, he will first chant 16 rounds. So whatever happens after those 16 rounds, that's between him and Krishna. But at least every day he will chant those rounds. So that was a doable goal. So he did it. So he went back and, I don't know, might have had some beer or something in between, who knows? I didn't ask anything. But he did chant his 16 rounds every day. So the point is that he set a goal that he could do, that he could accomplish. And then the next time he went home, so then he came back, and the next time he went home, then he was safe. The next time after he went back, his Krishna consciousness had developed maturely, and he was staying at home, and he had no problem. He didn't do anything. He didn't even watch television, because at that time he really got absorbed, and he was studying, and he was reading, and he was actually very happy. He took advantage of the time at home as a great time to perform his sadhana. So the point I wanted to make is that we also have to have some short-term, mid-term goals in our Krishna consciousness that can keep us engaged, something that is relevant. And then in this way, we develop our power to make healthy decisions. And that also, all these examples we can find in the Bhagavatam. So therefore, it is said that one cannot ascertain the ways of religion simply by imperfect experimental knowledge. And that is a fact, It is not by intelligence that you will figure out what exactly you should do. Actually, I have this nice book. Someone recently sent it to me. It's called really good book to read. It's called Intellectuals, and it's by Paul Johnson. And the whole book actually just looks at some of the most formative intellectuals, at least in terms of the modern Western world, like Rousseau, Marx, Tolstoy, Hemingway, Russell, all these big cats. And then the guy just basically shows how, I have to be honest, just how pathetic they are as humans, just in a general sense, like how flawed they were, like Karl Marx was a damn slob, the guy was just like sleeping every day till 12 o'clock and just, he's a real dirty guy, it's the kind of person that you never really would want to go into his apartment even. Then we have someone like Henrik Ibsen, a very famous playwright who wrote these intense plays, but he was a total megalomaniac, completely just, he was so weird, and he would wear all these medals, and he had this fetish for getting citations from different mayors in Europe because he really wanted to feel important. So we see completely touched by pride, completely attached to some kind of pride. Then what to speak of other people like Hemingway, ultimately drank himself to death or basically committed suicide. So the principle is just to show that we're looking at people that are extremely intelligent, but actually have no idea about what is the right course of action in this world. So actually a nice book to read and get some faith, or break also one's faith. Some of these modern people that we glorify. But the real people to glorify is the Mahajano Yena Katasa Pantaha. So the Mahajans, the real people who have shown how to live and act in this world in such a way to become free. Because as we said in the beginning, the whole rejection of religion was, in one sense, formulated by a good desire, which is desire for freedom. But real freedom is not a cheap thing. Freedom is ultimately something you have to work for. You have to work yourself up by first elevating yourself into the mode of goodness, so becoming intelligent enough to see what is good and bad. And then also, as we understand, the ultimate principle of freedom is to perform devotional service. So these two things happening together, investing in devotional service and investing in the mode of goodness as a support for our devotional service, is what will ultimately give us freedom. Because real freedom is freedom from desires. Freedom from desires that are unnecessary, from desires that bind us to do so many things that are not really giving us any good result. And the best way to do that is to basically connect again with the desire to serve Krishna. And that desire, as that takes birth in the heart and develops, it squeezes everything else out. And if one is fully desiring to serve Krishna, then one is completely free. Because that is the amazing thing with the desire to serve Krishna. This is the wonderful thing, is that nothing can stop it. No one can ever stop you from serving Krishna. No condition in this world can ever inhibit you to serve Krishna. Nothing can stop you. It is, if you simply desire to serve Krishna, the desire can be fulfilled. Because serving Krishna is as simple as even just chanting Krishna's name or just hearing about Krishna. So many things we can do to serve Krishna, and it's very simple. And it is completely independent of material conditions. So therefore, as this desire to serve Krishna becomes the predominating desire in our life, then we actually become very free, because that desire cannot be inhibited or disrupted by anything. And then one just cruises through the world, even though the boat might be knocked here and there by some waves and things, but one's desire to serve Krishna will always be fulfilled in that sense. So the rest of this chapter, Krishna will be getting into intricate understanding of what action and inaction is, and also, interestingly enough, explaining how sacrifice. A lot of this chapter also deals with explaining the reality of sacrifice, because once one understands the science of action, then one knows that the best action to perform is yajna, or sacrifice, to take action, to perform actions for the benefit of God, for the benefit of Krishna. And in this way, one will become freed. And also in this way, all one's necessities of life will also be fulfilled. So these were a few thoughts on this 16th chapter, this 16th verse of the 4th chapter that came to mind, very enlightening chapter. And if anyone would have any questions or any feedback, we would be grateful to hear them.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. That was very informative and very nice. We already have a question in the chat box sent by Deeptanshu. He writes, Hare Krishna Prabhu, my humble obeisances. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. Can you please reflect on actions as done by a jnana or karmi yogi versus action done by a bhakta, their respective consciousness and the results of these activities as by the different doers?
Interesting question. Well, firstly, we have to understand that also Krishna explains in the 19th verse of this chapter, he explains how it is the motivation behind an action that really determines its consequence. So this the main ingredient is the motivation. We even see it by law. For example, if you accidentally bump into someone and they fall off the stairs, that's one thing, and you might get into trouble. But if you purposefully push someone off the stairs, that's a whole different situation. So we see that the motivation behind action has a big effect, has a big effect on what the consequences of the results of the action will be. So when we look at the distinction between the jnani, the karmi, and the bhakta, then we see that is really the distinction between them. They can do very similar activities, actually. All three of them can perform meditation. All three of them can perform their duties as described to them according to Varnashram. So the external life can look very similar. All three of them can worship the deity. But the distinction between them is the motivation behind it. That is the real distinction between them. And then also naturally, the motivation also have some difference in practice, so focus on what their practice is. So the jnani will be generally absorbed way more in studying certain literatures like the Vedanta Sutra. The karmi will put much more emphasis on the performance of his duties, social duties, and the bhakta will then naturally put much more emphasis on executing the desires of his spiritual master. Which is important to remember, that is the main business of the devotee. Because even the performance of devotional service, all the 9 limbs of bhakti, the reason we're doing these things is because Guru told us. That's the desire of the Guru. So the distinction between them is then in the motivation, the desire, the reason why they're doing it. So the karmi, he is performing whatever he is doing because he is hungry for the results. He wants to have good results. And therefore he knows, okay, if I do these things well, then I will be happy, healthy, and wise, if you want to call it. So therefore he does all these things. He does his duty. We see, for example, if you go to India, you would see, if you go to the temple, you see so many people come to the temple because in general people have faith. They have faith that if I go see the deities, then good things will come. But what are those good things that they want? So many people, they come see the deity because they think if I go see the deity, then my family will be healthy and I will have financially be secure and all these things. So in one sense, it's good, they're coming, but you see the difference of motivation that is there. So the jnani then, he desires freedom. He desires liberation. So he desires not to get entangled in matter and to see the distinction between matter and spirit. So therefore, all these activities he is performing with a desire to get detachment an increased knowledge or realization of the distinction between matter and spirit. So that is the jnani's desire. So then they also perform austerity for that purpose. So performing austerity for the purpose of becoming detached or becoming renounced, something one can practice. Buddhism, for example, is also full of that. Then we see that the bhakta, what is the bhakta doing? His desire is to please Krishna. So a very radically different than all these other motivations. And even though he might be doing the same thing. So for example, a devotee, he can be performing austerities, he can do something difficult. But he's not doing difficult things so that he can become renounced. He does difficult things because somehow to execute the orders of his spiritual master, there is some difficulty involved. And then he tolerates and he performs austerities in that way. But he is doing it to please Krishna. And actually your ability to do difficult things greatly increases. There's a story of a monk in the Orthodox tradition, and he was well known to be extremely austere, very austere, performing all these severe austerities in the monastery. And then he decided, no, the next step in his spiritual life is he has to go out to the desert, to be all alone, to perform his austerities there in the desert. But then he went there, and then something interesting. He realized then, when he went there, that he couldn't be so austere anymore. He was alone there in the desert, and he couldn't control his senses. He couldn't perform all these austerities. He couldn't sleep as little as he used to, or eat as little as he used to. And then he realized, wow, the reason why I was able to perform all these austerities in the monastery, because I knew other people, they knew about it. And I knew that I was well known as the most austere. And now, because I'm sitting here alone in the desert and no one knows about my austerities, now I don't have any motivation. So then he became actually very humbled by that experience. And he realized, my God, I'm actually only performing these austerities for some sake of prestige. So in any case, the point is that the devotee, his main motivation is just simply to please, to please his spiritual master and to please Krishna. And that motivation is very nice because it always keeps one very jolly. So this then is the distinction between the jnani, the bhakti, the bhakta, and the karmi, in essence. And the motivation is the most important distinction, and the physical actions are really secondary. Any other questions on the chat?
Yes, there are two questions. One is from Ligia. She asks, is spiritual growth a linear process that we can control, or are times of so-called laziness maybe fruitful later on?
Very interesting question. No, definitely not linear in a sense. Linear, that's a very thoughtful question. So, if you would read the 8th canto, Bhagavatam, then you would read a very interesting section where there is a churning of the milk ocean. So the churning of the milk ocean, then you had a very interesting dynamic. You had the ocean was to be churned to produce the nectar of immortality. But the demigods, they were pulling on the one side. The demons were pulling on the other side. And then the churning rope was Vasuki, the serpent. Then it is explained there how the demigods were empowered by the mode of goodness. The demons were empowered by the mode of passion. And Vasuki, poor Vasuki, who was wrapped around this mountain, he was empowered by the mode of ignorance to be able to tolerate all that pain. That is, you can imagine, being used as a churning rope is not really, cannot really be a pleasant experience. So, and in the purport, Prabhupada points out that all these three modes of nature, even for the devotee, they have their purpose. So you cannot always be linearly think that you always have to be, on the same pace, doing things at the same pace with the same intensity. It doesn't actually work. We see that in the which chapter is the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, he makes an interesting point, and he says that the yogi who is balanced in his work, his eating, his sleeping, his recreation, and his work, that yogi, he will be able to be freed from all misery by practicing yoga. So the idea is that really to stay in an optimal condition to perform spiritual life, it's not really just a linear process of working very hard and very intensely, but it's much more a balancing act. It's an act of great balance. So you have to have various ingredients in your life. And that includes service, intensity, but it also includes rest. It also actually includes recreation. Can you believe that? We see that Prabhupada, when he went to America the first time, when he was in America, then at a certain point he had a heart attack. And then it was the Memorial Day weekend. So America has all these interesting weekends that the rest of the world just doesn't know about. But, they're like so serious. Like now we're having Thanksgiving tomorrow. And it's like this big thing, Thanksgiving. But, God, no one else celebrates it. But in any case, here the whole world stops. So then it was Memorial Day weekend. So they couldn't find a doctor. But then they found this very old Jewish doctor. So he came there and they sort of brought him out and he went in to see Prabhupada. Prabhupada was lying in this dark room in the bed and he was looking at him and this doctor was sort of very offensive. He didn't like the devotees and he was sort of looking around. It's a weird place, weird people, what's happening here? So then he just went out and he said, actually, there's nothing wrong with the old man. The problem is this old man, he prays too much. He's praying too much. He should go out for like a walk. He should get some sunlight. He should go outside and just, God, he can't just sit inside his room praying all day. That's why he's getting a heart attack. So then Brahmananda heard it. Brahmananda thought, oh, this person is so offensive, So he said, okay, no, you have to leave. So then they just took him out. But then he went to Prabhupada and he said, sorry, Prabhupada, for this obnoxious doctor. Prabhupada looked at Prabhupada and says, no, actually, he gave some very good advice. This is very good advice. And at that point, when Prabhupada started his morning walk, soon after that, he started his practice of going for a walk every morning due to that advice of that Jewish doctor. So very interesting that Prabhupada said, yes, this is also required. And even in Bhagavad-gita Bhushan, he says that is the recreation of the yogi, is to go for walks in nature. So we all need to have some recreation. My God, everybody needs to relax every now and again, isn't it? Even if you're working, so you need to relax. So that is also part of spiritual life. So to find a way to relax in a way that is favorable for your devotional service. So therefore, not just linear, not just always with intensity, working, moving hard. Then you're not being balanced. And at a certain point, you will end up either in the hospital or you will end up outside of the association of spiritual people because you just can't take it anymore. But a lot of that pressure is self-generated. And if we look, therefore, again, if we look at this book, what did Prabhupada say? That one has to act in Krishna consciousness by following the leadership of authorized persons. So if we actually then look at the great teachers that have come before us, you see that in general, there was a certain kind of balance that they would maintain in their life. At the end of his life, close to the end of Prabhupada's time on this planet, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was also trying to encourage him to translate more and more because he was thinking if Prabhupada would get fired up about translating and then he would be willing to stay longer in the world. So he was putting some pressure on Prabhupada. And at a certain point, Prabhupada just told him, he says, in any activity, there's sometimes some relaxation. So, you cannot always work with the same intensity. So he told him that now my translation is going down, but this is all natural. And at a certain point, it will pick up again. So being able to move through these different moods and able to navigate our way through this balancing between our service, our health, and our own spiritual practice. The more expert we become in balancing these things, then your spiritual growth will be more sustainable. So it's actually staying in like a kind of a zone where all these things are relatively balanced. But it requires constant attention, just like riding a bicycle. Like you don't get like a balance and then you stick like that your whole life. You always have to adjust. And like, for example, say you're a brahmachari. If you look at that, so brahmachari, and then you have a certain kind of way to balance things out. And then you get married, and then it's like, whoa, there's so many other things to balance out. And then you sort of figure out your balance. And then you get children, and then it's like, oh my God, then it's like a whole other thing you have to balance out. And then your children hit puberty, and then it's like, oh my God. So life is like that the whole time. It's like new things are happening. So always you have to adjust. You have to always sort of make sure that you get everything covered. And then your spiritual life will be secure. And in that way, we stay always open to Krishna's mercy. and if we intelligently arrange our life to at least always keep a connection with devotional service very strongly as a main priority, then our spiritual growth will be secure. Any other questions?
Yes, there is one more question in the chat box by Divya Gita. She asks about if karma can be changed, or is it rather whatever is going to happen will happen, and can Krishna change your karma?
Okay, interesting. No, karma, as Krishna says, the intricacies of karma are very hard to understand. So, firstly, karma includes within it a certain space within the individual to make decisions. So, the lower you go down into the modes of nature, the more tight karma becomes. Just like in this world, humans, we cannot fly. You cannot just fly. You don't have wings to fly. Humans have to walk. It's okay, you can have technology and you can move around, but we're constricted in terms of how we move. But if you go to prison, then your movement is even much more constricted. Then you're really constricted, really just to one little small space. So similarly, if you go down to the lower species of life, then you're even more constricted. If you become a dog, if you're a dog, you're really constricted because you're so much governed by instinct. If you become a plant, then you're really constricted. If you become a tree, you can't even move. You're just standing solitary. So karma means that it constricts us, and it can also give us some space. So the higher we move up into the mode of goodness, the more karma relaxes, the more space we have to make decisions and to think and to consider, do I want to do this or do I want to do that? So the more higher we go, the more space we have to make decisions, and the more we can consciously decide what kind of action do I want to perform. So in this way, karma, not everybody is bound to the same extent. In one sense, we have different levels of freedom according to the elevation of our consciousness. Now, then obviously when you add devotional service, even there, another kind of factor comes into play where yes, definitely, it is possible by the execution of devotional service to radically alter your karma and your destiny. Why is that? Well, because karma has a purpose. Even the purpose in this material world is that karma is meant to humble us, actually, believe it or not. The whole world is just made in such a way that to give you a little scope to do your own thing, but at the same time, at a certain point, you realize that you're actually very tiny and insignificant because the world humiliates us regularly. So, but the moment you become a devotee, you are basically working with the process. You are actively cultivating a service attitude. You are actively cultivating and desiring to be humble and to develop good qualities. And therefore, so many other things that should have come your way is not really necessary anymore because you've already personally worked on it. Just like if you go to prison, if you're a good prisoner, if you really cooperate with the prison authorities, and you really sort of show that you're actually transforming yourself, then your prison sentence can be greatly reduced. Because what's the point? The purpose of prison is to reform people. Even they call it a reformation center. So if you have, by your own efforts, also reformed yourself, work with the process, why should you stay in there for 10 extra years? They can just cut it off. So similarly, that's how this world also works. You have to understand that karma is not blind, that the world is not blind. There's an intelligence behind everything. It is organizing everything. Everything is done by some intelligence. So as we start to surrender to Krishna, then even the demigods and those who are in control of this world, they will adjust the situations that we are experiencing accordingly. Obviously, one has to have some faith in that, but it is a fact. And the problem, our biggest problem, well, not the biggest problem, we have many problems. One of our problems in Krishna consciousness is we cannot see how things would have turned out if we weren't performing devotional service. But if you could see that, I promise you, your faith and determination would be very strong. If you would be able to see where you would have ended up in if you didn't take up devotional service, you would be shocked, be completely shocked to see, oh my God, that's where I would have gone. And sometimes you have these visions, at least for myself, I have these experiences sometimes in life where I come into contact with my previous karma, with certain worlds, and I realize, oh my God, I would have ended up here. I would have been like that if it wasn't for devotional service. And it's quite shocking. So every now and again we have this vision. So it's not that is it possible for devotional service to change akarma? What do you mean? It is guaranteed, and it has already happened to you also so much. You just don't know, you just can't see the alternative. But sometimes Krishna shows us these things, and it makes perfect sense, because the world is not a bad place. It's not a torture house that just give us unnecessary trouble. It has a purpose to it. There's a point to it. There's a point to this whole place that we're inhabiting. And if you go with the purpose, then things become much more easier, and then your conditions will change. So it makes very much sense. Any other questions?
There are no more questions in the chat box. However, if there are questions by anyone else who would like to speak to us through their microphone, they can just unmute themselves and ask the questions right away. You can unmute yourselves by clicking on the little microphone icon in the bottom left corner. So I don't see anyone. Yeah, there is one person asking a question in the chat box, Ligia Lütiken. She wants to ask a question about balancing. Ligia, you can unmute yourselves or type the question into the chat box. Balancing.
May I speak?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you a lot for all your explanations, and in particular for your answer to my question on spiritual growth is linear or not. It was very helpful. So the next question now, balancing over 24 hours, over a lifetime, or over, you understand? In my experience, I have times where I thought, oh, I'm lazy, I'm not, I'm bad. And after sometimes I realized it was a very fruitful time in growing, in spiritual growing, but I wasn't conscious about this. And now I ask myself how much discipline I need, and maybe too much discipline prevents something to happen. You understand my question?
Yes, it's a very German question.
But I'm not German, I'm Romanian. But I live in Germany.
Interesting. Well, you definitely maybe got something from Germany there. So yes, it's a fact. So discipline, everything has its purpose. So Rupa Goswami explains that you judge everything according to whether it is favorable or unfavorable for your devotional service. And that is very important. Discipline is not just always categorically good. It's like austerity. It's not that just by suffering it is guaranteed that you are definitely getting Krishna's mercy. No, sometimes by sitting with devotees and just having a wonderful feast and just really having such a wonderful experience, there we can also make so much spiritual advancement. So it's not just by somehow suffering. That's the best way. That's like, that's really where you're going to make a lot of spiritual advancement. That's really the nectar. If you can really, do something very, very difficult. That's also there sometimes, but it's not only. So you have to judge everything. So sometimes we take up, like for example, Prabhupada would travel with some of his disciples, and then sometimes they would go on these interesting diets, these very austere diets, like just eating fruit or just eating boiled rice. And then Prabhupada would say, what is the point? What is the point of you performing all these things? Like once he was with one disciple and he was on some kind of a diet. The Prabhupada said, listen, stop this diet. You're a young man. He says, one day when you're old, then you can do these diets when you can't digest anything anymore. But now you're a young man, just eat normally. So the point is that we sometimes have too much faith that discipline or difficulty is the way forward. Discipline is important, but discipline is always just supportive. Discipline is just something that's supposed to support something more important. And sometimes a relaxation can also really help. Relaxation, if it's done in the correct way, it will allow us to relax, and then it also frees up a certain amount of energy that we can also use to hear and to chant. So Prabhupada, for example, his system originally for his disciples was that spent 8 months in the Western world working very hard to spread Krishna consciousness, and then 4 months you spend in India where you just relax, basically. But in a Krishna conscious way, you just go to the program, you just read, you write, you hear, you study, you nourish yourself. So these two things, discipline and nourishment, are the two things that have to be balanced out with one another. Discipline is very good. I love it. I love discipline. And I think it's very wonderful. And if there's not enough discipline, then things are horrible. But it has to be balanced out by nourishment. And nourishment, just as wonderful, just as important. And both of them have essential roles to play in Krishna consciousness. And that is the two things that have to be balanced out. So sometimes when you're saying, basically, when it seems like you're just relaxing or being lazy, it can be a time of replenishing and nourishing. And just be a time, like for example, sometimes you really just have to rest. God, you really just have to sleep and eat well and just not be under any kind of stress. And that's sometimes the kind of therapy that you need. So, but I think if you can shift this, do that kind of understand that discipline is balanced out by nourishing, then you will be able to also appreciate and not feel guilty for your periods of relaxation. You will see that that is also required. Sometimes you just have to, like my spiritual master, he used to, when he was traveling quite a lot, then can you imagine if you're 60 years plus and you're just flying from one place to another. But Mondays he would take a day off. Mondays would be the day that he's not seeing people, he's just taking rest, he's resting so that he can have energy. So it's very interesting. And he's a very intense person. Bhaktivedanta Swami, I mean, he's like, he's someone who's always working very hard and very intense, but at the same time, he knows that he has to sometimes just stop. And Prabhupada, you also see what Prabhupada used to do. He used to go to Hawaii. And Hawaii was like Prabhupada's pit stop where he would basically relax. Hawaii was just like eating mangoes and taking coconut juice, and there's not so much happening because in Hawaii, nothing really happens. It's just like paradise. And in Hawaii, Prabhupada would generally, he would be able to translate a little more because he had more time. So even Prabhupada, who was the epitome of someone who was very disciplined, working very hard, even he had these different he balanced his life out with these different experiences. And sometimes he would also actually relax. So we shouldn't be afraid of relaxing as long as it is favorable for Krishna consciousness. Okay, I think I have to also bounce some other obligations on this side. It was very wonderful to be with all of you, and always some very nice questions that come up. And I'm so grateful and impressed by your continued Bhagavad-gita Sangha. I think this Sangha has gone on the longest. Many other Sanghas have died as people become tired of sitting in front of Zoom, but somehow all of you have maintained your enthusiasm, and it is very wonderful. So I thank you very much, and I hope one day in the future I will be here with you again. Thank you, jñātvā, for inviting me, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Prabhu, and thank you very much for being with us. We hope to have you with us again. Divya Gita writes in the chat box, thanks so much, great lecture, I'm elevated. And also Lydia says, thank you. And I say thank you to all of you who have joined us from all over the world and also from Berlin and the surrounding areas. Thank you for being with us and have a good night. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. Hari Bol.